Here's what you need to know about VHS tapes. They degrade. The magnetic oxide flakes off the polyester backing like dead skin. Every time you play one, you're destroying it. The tape head scrapes across the surface, stealing particles, leaving gaps. Play it enough times and the image ghosts. The sound warbles. Eventually you're watching static remember what it used to be. The tape labeled WVTX Public Access 12/22/83 hold has been played exactly 4 times. Once by the person who found it in a Vermont storage unit in 2019, wedged between a broken Betamax player and several boxes of old tax returns. Once by a digitization service that didn't watch what they were archiving, just converted it to a file and charged me $40. Twice by me. I can see the degradation. There's a line of magnetic noise that runs vertically through the image at minute 7. At minute 22, the audio drops out. At minute 43, the broadcast ends. Just stops mid-sentence. Then static. Then nothing. According to the station logs from WVTX, the program was scheduled for 60 minutes. 17 minutes are missing. The station manager's notes from that night say only, "Discontinue immediately. Do not re-air. Destroy master tape." They didn't destroy it. Someone kept it. The broadcast shows a man sitting at a desk in a sparse studio. There's a small plastic Christmas tree in the corner. The lights are unplugged. The man wears a suit and tie but looks like he's been awake for 3 days straight, or like he's finally, after years of insomnia, found the thing that was keeping him up. His name is Dr. Vernon Pale. He taught moral philosophy at a college that doesn't exist anymore. He's been dead for 40 years, or he's been no one for 40 years. Depends on how you define dead. He starts the broadcast by saying, "Good evening. Tonight I want to talk about gifts. Not the giving of them, but the violence of them." For 43 minutes he builds an argument. Every present is a weighted object. Every act of generosity is a demand disguised as love. Christmas is capitalism's most honest ritual because it makes the transaction explicit. We exchange gifts and call it affection, but really we're trading debts, keeping ledgers, calculating who owes whom and how much and whether we're even. Then at minute 43, Dr. Vernon Pale says, "The only ethical position, the only way to love without violence is to..." and then static. The station manager cut the feed, called the police. When they checked Pale's apartment, he was gone. Not dead, just gone. Never taught another class, never cashed another paycheck, never existed in any official capacity again. 40 years later, someone finds the tape, watches it and decides that we need to hear what Dr. Vernon Pale said about Christmas, about gifts, about what we really owe each other. This is that broadcast. This is what happens when someone takes their philosophy seriously enough to disappear. Dr. Vernon Pale taught at Prescott College in northern Vermont. Not the one that still exists, the other one. The one that closed in 1987 when enrollment dropped to 43 students and the heating system failed and nobody wanted to fix it because nobody wanted to be there anyway. Pale taught classes with titles like The Ethics of Refusal and Antisocial Contract Theory. Classes that 17-year-olds signed up for thinking they'd learn about rebellion and instead learned about Kant, about categorical imperatives, about the difference between freedom and just being an arsehole. His office was in the basement of Whitman Hall. It smelled like burnt coffee and mildew and 30 years of tobacco smoke that had soaked into the walls back when you could still do that. There was one window at ground level. You could see people's feet walking past. Pale had a habit of stopping mid-lecture to stare at those feet, just watching them move like he was trying to figure out where everyone was going in such a hurry. He wore the same brown corduroy jacket every day, patches on the elbows that he'd sewn himself badly. His students remember that he never made eye contact during office hours. He'd look at the wall behind you or down at his desk or out at those feet moving past the window. But he'd listen. He'd actually listen. Most professors perform listening. Pale just did it. He'd let you talk yourself into circles, and then he'd say something like, "You're asking the wrong question." Or, "That's not actually what bothers you, is it?" One student described him as the kind of teacher who made you wish you were smarter so you could disappoint him less. He published nothing. No tenure track, no academic ambitions beyond the basement office and the 73 students who cycled through his classes every semester. Some of them loved him, some of them thought he was a fraud. Nobody was neutral about Vernon Pale. In November 1983, he walked into WVTX Public Access and asked for airtime. The station manager, a guy named Dale Pritchard, who's 68 now and still lives in Burlington, remembers Pale seeming wound up. Not manic, not unhinged, just focused in a way that made Dale uncomfortable. Like Pale had been rehearsing something and he was finally ready to perform it. He wanted to do a Christmas special, Dale says. A philosophy lecture about gift giving. I figured it'd be boring as hell, but it was public access. We said yes to anything that wasn't pornographic or actively seditious. Dale gave him an hour, Thursday night, December 22nd. Prime time for public access, which meant maybe 400 people would watch. Maybe. Pale showed up 2 hours early, brought his own props. The plastic Christmas tree, a card table he wanted to use as a desk. He was dressed formally, suit and tie. Dale remembers thinking Pale looked like he was going to a funeral, or hosting one. I asked if he wanted the Christmas tree plugged in, for ambience or whatever. He said no, said it was important that it stayed dark. The broadcast starts at 8 p.m. Pale sits at the card table. The unplugged Christmas tree looms in the background like a dead thing someone forgot to throw away. Pale looks directly at the camera, doesn't blink for 11 seconds. Then he begins. Good evening. Tonight I want to talk about gifts. Not the giving of them, but the violence of them. The way every present is a weighted object, a small debt wrapped in paper, a demand disguised as generosity. His voice is calm, measured. The voice of someone who's thought about this for years and is finally saying it out loud. The voice of someone confessing to a crime they are still committing. We tell ourselves that gifts are free. That's the word we use, free gift. As if the two concepts aren't fundamentally opposed. Nothing given is free. Everything given costs. The question is who pays and how much and for how long. He talks about Marcel Mauss, about the essay on gift economies, about how in pre-modern societies, gifts weren't expressions of affection. They were binding contracts, social debts. You gave someone a blanket and they owed you. Not money, not an equivalent blanket. They owed you their allegiance, their obligation, their future. Refusing a gift, Pale says, was tantamount to declaring war. Because refusing a gift meant refusing the relationship, refusing the debt, and the debt was the point. The debt was always the point. He leans forward. The camera angle makes him look larger than he is, makes the studio feel smaller. We pretend we've evolved past this. We pretend our gifts are pure, expressions of love without strings attached. But watch what happens at Christmas. Watch how we calculate, how we spend roughly equivalent amounts on each other, how we feel guilty when someone spends more on us than we spent on them, how we keep mental ledgers even as we insist we are not keeping score. Watch, watch, watch. He uses the word like a drumbeat, like a warning. Watch how affection curdles into resentment when the numbers don't match. Watch how we give gifts we think people should want instead of gifts they actually want because the gift is never about them. It's about us, about proving we know them, about purchasing their gratitude, about making them owe us. The tape shows him pausing, reaching for a glass of water that isn't there. His hand hovers in empty air for a moment before he pulls it back. Christmas is capitalism's most honest ritual. It strips away the pretense. For 1 month every year, we admit that love is transactional, that we're all keeping ledgers, that every relationship is just an exchange of debts we've agreed to call something prettier. At minute 18, the station receives its first call. Someone asking if Dr. Pale takes questions. Dale patches it through. The broadcast was supposed to be lecture only, but Pale had insisted on the possibility of interaction. Said he wanted to hear what people thought. Said philosophy wasn't a monologue. Dale says that's when he started to worry. That's when Pale stopped sounding like a professor and started sounding like someone with a plan. The first caller is a woman. Her voice sounds like she's calling from a kitchen. You can hear water running in the background. The radio of ordinary life. Dr. Pale, I'm trying to understand. Are you saying we shouldn't give gifts at all? Pale doesn't hesitate. I'm saying we should be honest about what we're doing. Stop pretending the gift is for them. Admit it's for you. Admit you're purchasing their obligation. Admit that every time you hand someone a wrapped box, you're making a claim on their future. You're saying, remember me. You're saying you owe me. You're saying I have shaped your life without asking permission. The woman doesn't respond. The line goes quiet, and then a click. She's gone. Pale looks at the camera like he expected this, like he's been hung up on before. Every gift, he says, is an ontological imposition. Ontological. He brandishes the word like a sword. When you give someone something, you are not just transforming an object. You're inserting yourself into their existence. You're making them carry you. Every gift is a small haunting, a way of staying present in someone's life whether they want you there or not. He starts giving examples. This is where the broadcast gets uncomfortable. A grandmother who gives her grandchildren gifts they don't want, sweaters that don't fit, toys for children years younger than they are. She gives them anyway because the gift isn't about the grandchildren. It's about her, about proving she's still relevant, still remembered, still owed visits and phone calls and gratitude. The grandchildren learn to smile and say thank you and add another item to the pile of things they'll donate or throw away or shove in a closet and forget. But they can't forget her. That's the point. The gift is a tether, a reminder, a small violence wrapped in tissue paper. Or the romantic partner who gives expensive gifts. Jewelry, trips, things that cost more than you'd ever spend on yourself. They say it's because they love you, but watch what happens when you don't react with sufficient enthusiasm. Watch how their face changes. Watch how the gift becomes evidence, proof that they care more, proof that you're ungrateful, proof that the relationship is unbalanced and you're the one who isn't trying hard enough. The gift is a test you didn't know you were taking, a debt you didn't agree to carry. Or the parent who gives conditionally, the college tuition that comes with expectations about your major, the down payment on the house that comes with opinions about where you should live, the help that isn't help, the generosity that's just control with a bow on it. They say they're giving you opportunities. They're really giving you a script, a role to play, a life to live that looks like the one they wanted for themselves. And you can't refuse. Refusing would mean you're selfish. Refusing would mean you don't appreciate sacrifice. Refusing would make you the villain in their story about how much they've given up for you. Pale's voice gets quieter as he goes through these examples. Not softer, quieter, like he's trying to make you lean in, like he's telling you a secret. Jean-Paul Sartre said hell is other people, but he didn't go far enough. Hell is other people giving you things, because every gift is an attempt to define you from the outside, to tell you who you are by what they think you need, by what they think you want, and by what they think you should be grateful for. He stops, drinks from the glass of water that's materialized since the last time he reached for it. You don't see anyone bring it to him. It's just there, like the tape skipped. Continuity doesn't matter anymore. The gift is never neutral. The gift is always a claim. This is who I think you are. This is what I think you lack. This is the hole in your life I've decided to fill without asking if you wanted it filled. And now you owe me. Not just for the object, for the thought, the effort, the love I'm telling you this represents, even though what it really represents is my need to be needed by you. The second caller comes in at minute 24. A man, angry. You can hear it before he speaks. The breath he takes is loaded. This is the most cynical garbage I've ever heard. You're telling people not to give gifts on Christmas. You're telling people that loving their families is somehow wrong. Pale's face doesn't change. He looks at the camera like he's looking through it, like he can see the man in his living room getting red in the face, getting ready to turn the channel and to forget this ever happened. Cynicism would be easier. Cynicism would mean I don't believe in anything. I believe in too much. I believe that love is real and that gifts corrupt it. I believe that we're capable of generosity and that we've built a system that makes it impossible. You're not angry because I'm being cynical. You're angry because you know I'm right. You felt the weight of gifts you didn't want. You've given gifts hoping for something in return. A smile, a thank you, a sign that you matter to someone. We all have. That's not cynical. That's just true. The man starts to respond, but Pale talks over him. The uncomfortable truth is that we give gifts because we're terrified of our own insignificance. Every present is a desperate attempt to prove that we exist in someone else's life. To prove we're not alone. To prove that our existence matters enough to be remembered. But we can't just say that. We can't just ask, do I matter to you? So we wrap the question in sparkly paper, we disguise the need as generosity, and we call it Christmas. The line goes dead. The man hung up, or Dale cut him off. Either way, the silence that follows is thick, heavy, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. Pale sits in it, lets it stretch. Then the phone rings again. The third caller is young, college age maybe. The voice shakes a little, not from fear, from recognition, like hearing someone finally say the thing you've been thinking alone in the dark. Dr. Pale, what do we do? If gifts are violence, if love itself is obligation, what's left? The tape shows Pale going still, completely still, like something in him just locked into place, like this is the question he'd been waiting for. Everything else was just a preamble, just throat clearing before the real confession. He stares at the camera, doesn't blink, doesn't move. The seconds stretch. 5, 10, 15. Dale says later that he almost cut to commercial, almost ended it right there. But something about Pale's face stopped him. Something about the way Pale looked, like he was about to either cry or laugh or burn the studio down. That's what I'm going to talk about next, Pale finally says. That's the real question. The line goes quiet. Pale straightens his papers, adjusts his tie, takes a breath that the microphone catches, deep, deliberate, the breath of someone about to jump. And then he begins. For the next 17 minutes, Dr. Vernon Pale explains how to love without violence, how to give without creating debt, how to exist in relationship without imposing on existence. The station manager cut the feed before he finished, but we have pieces, fragments, enough to reconstruct the shape of what he said, if not the exact words. At minute 43, the tape ends, mid-sentence. Pale is saying, the only ethical position, the only way to love without violence is, and then static, white noise, the hiss of nothing. Dale Pritchard remembers his hand on the switch, remembers the station's lawyer watching the monitor in the next room, remembers the phone ringing, someone from the college asking what the hell they were broadcasting, someone saying shut it down now. Dale flicked the switch. But 7 people recorded the full broadcast, 7 VCR tapes running in 7 living rooms across northern Vermont. One of those tapes still exists, partially. The audio is there, but the tape was damaged. Water, mold, time. You can hear Pale's voice, but it cuts in and out. Words emerge from static like bodies surfacing in a lake. We have another source, A student of Pale's, a woman named Teresa Grimm, who took 3 of his classes and kept notes from a conversation they had 2 years after the broadcast, after Pale disappeared. Everyone assumed he was dead or hiding or just gone. She says he contacted her once. A letter with no return address. Postmarked from Oregon or Ohio or Oklahoma. The postmark was smudged. Deliberately, maybe. In the letter, Pale explained what he said in those 17 minutes, what he argued, what he was trying to make people understand. Here's what we can piece together. The only way to give without imposing debt is to give anonymously and irrevocably. To give in a way that can never be repaid, never be traced, never create relationship. True generosity requires the dissolution of the self. You cannot give as you, because the moment there's a you giving, there's a them receiving, and the machinery of debt begins. The obligation starts, the weight gets transferred. Pale talks about agape love, the Greek concept, unconditional love, love without object, love that doesn't need the beloved to love back, doesn't need acknowledgement, doesn't need reciprocation, just loves because loving is what it does. Like the sun doesn't need you to thank it for rising, it just rises, warms you, asks nothing. He talks about Buddhist non-attachment, about how desire is suffering and possessiveness is pain, and the only way out is through letting go. Letting go of wanting, letting go of needing to be needed, letting go of the idea that your existence should matter to someone else. He talks about Christian mystics who gave everything away. Francis of Assisi stripping naked in the town square and walking away from his father's wealth. Simone Weil refusing to eat more than ration portions during the war because other people were starving. People who understood that to love without violence meant to stop being someone who could claim credit for loving. The fragments from the damaged tape catch phrases. You can hear Pale saying, "Anonymous giving is the only ethical giving." You can hear him saying, "The self is the problem. The self is always the problem." You can hear, "To love purely, you must become no one." Then it gets personal. According to Teresa's notes from the letter, Pale told his audience something that made Dale cut the feed, something that made the college call and that crossed a line nobody knew existed until Pale stepped over it. He told them he'd been practicing this philosophy for 3 years, since 1980. He'd been giving anonymously. Money left in envelopes in mailboxes, groceries delivered to addresses he found in newspaper articles about families struggling. Tuition payments made to the college bursar's office with instructions to apply them to students who couldn't afford to continue. Help that appeared like grace, like accident, like someone made a clerical error in your favor and you should just accept it and not ask questions. He'd been systematically erasing himself from his own generosity, and he said it felt like freedom, like he'd discovered the one way to exist without weight, without obligation, without the burden of being known. But then he said something else, the thing that made Dale's hand move toward that switch. "Tonight is my last broadcast. Tomorrow, I'll be no one. I wanted to tell you this so you'd understand. The only gift I can give you is my absence." Dale cut the feed. The red light on the camera died, and Pale sat in the dark studio with the unplugged Christmas tree behind him. Dale watched him from the control room, just sitting, not moving, not crying, not anything. Just sitting with his hands folded on the card table like he was waiting for something to happen. Finally, he stood up, shook Dale's hand, said thank you, and walked out into the December night. Dale called the police, not because Pale threatened anything, but because absence is its own kind of threat, because someone saying they're going to become no one sounds suspiciously like something else. The police went to Pale's apartment, the basement unit on Spruce Street. Door was unlocked. Inside they found clothes folded neatly on the bed, dishes washed and put away, a note on the kitchen table that said donate everything, and 17 books on philosophy and theology piled on the floor. No body, no note explaining where or why or how, just a life that he'd stopped living. Vernon Pale never taught another class, never cashed another paycheck, never appeared in any official capacity again. Social security number went dormant, bank account emptied and closed. It's like he walked out of the studio and off the edge of the world. Some people think he killed himself. walked into the woods, let the cold take him, a philosophical suicide disguised as exposure. Some people think he just left, started over somewhere with a new name, became the anonymous giver he'd been theorizing about, the person who helps without being a person. Teresa thinks something else. She thinks Pale did exactly what he said he was going to do. She thinks he became no one, not metaphorically, but actually. She thinks he found a way to exist without existing, to give without being, to love without the violence of presence. The damaged tape catches one more fragment, the last thing Pale says before the feed is cut. You can barely hear it under the static, but it's there. You think I'm talking about death. I'm talking about something harder. What nobody wants to acknowledge about Vernon's disappearance is that it worked. Not in the way that running away works, not in the way that faking your death and starting over in Albuquerque with a new name and a job at a hardware store work. It worked the way a philosophical argument works when you prove it by living it, when you don't just write about the thing, but you become the thing. Pale didn't end himself, he did something stranger. He stopped being a person you could find. He stopped leaving traces. In 1983, before digital footprints were inescapable, before every purchase and click and movement got logged in databases nobody can fully delete, Pale managed what might be the last true disappearance in history. He became no one. Not anonymous, that's a difference. Anonymous artists still create, still leave their work behind, still shape the world even if they don't sign their names. Banksy is anonymous. Banksy is not no one. You can see where Banksy has been, you can follow the trail of altered walls and sold canvases and cultural impact. Banksy exists. They just don't want you to know who Banksy is. Pale wanted something else. He wanted to stop existing as someone who could be known, as someone who could be obligated, who could give or receive or participate in the machinery of debt he'd spent 43 minutes explaining on public access television. Philosophers talk about this sometimes, not physical death, ego death, social death, the death of being recognized, being remembered, being someone whose absence could be mourned because mourning requires an object and Pale was trying to stop being an object. Ambrose Bierce did it in 1913, walked into Mexico during the Revolution, wrote letters saying he was going to ride with Pancho Villa. Then nothing, no body, no grave, no confirmation, just a famous writer walking into chaos and dissolving. People still argue about what happened, and that's the point. The mystery keeps him alive, keeps him being someone. Beethoven did it better. Wrote and published books, but refused to confirm his identity. Every interview request denied, every photograph refused. When people claimed to know who he was, he didn't confirm or deny, just kept writing, kept being no one. He died in 1969 and left behind work, but no self, no biography anyone could agree on, and no person to pin the writing to. Fernando Pessoa fractured himself into heteronyms, didn't write under pen names, but created complete personalities. Alberto Cairo, Ricardo Reis, Alvaro de Campos, each with their own biography, their own style and their own philosophy. Pessoa said he didn't write their poems, they did. He was just the place where they appeared. He turned himself into a house that other selves lived in, made his own existence optional. But Pale went further, didn't leave behind books or mystery, or anything except one censored broadcast and a theory about why presence is violence. He stopped creating traces, stopped being findable, just disappeared into the static between radio stations, into the white noise between channels, the gap where people used to be before surveillance capitalism made gaps impossible. The question nobody wants to ask is, was he right? Is the only way to love without obligation to remove yourself from the equation entirely? Is presence itself a form of violence? Think about it. Every time you show up in someone's life, you're making a claim. Every time you're there, you're asking to be considered, to be accommodated, to be dealt with. Even if you're not asking for anything, even if you're just existing near someone, your existence near them is a demand, a small, constant pressure, the weight of being perceived. The parent who's always there, always available, always ready to help. You can't refuse them. You can't tell them to leave you alone because they're being generous. They're being loving. They're giving you their presence, and their presence is a gift you can't return. You're obligated to be grateful, to include them, to make space for them in your life whether you want it or not. Then there's the friend who shows up, who checks in, who remembers your birthday and asks how you're doing and wants to be part of your life. You can't tell them you'd rather be alone. You can't say you don't want to be known this well, because that would make you the bad person, the ungrateful one, the one who rejects love. So you accept the friendship, accept the obligation, accept the weight of being cared about by someone you maybe don't want caring about you. Attachment theory calls this secure attachment, being there, being consistent, being present, the foundation of healthy relationship, the thing that makes people feel safe, that lets children grow into adults who can trust and connect and love without terror. But what if secure attachment is just a nicer name for inescapable obligation? What if being there for someone is just a long-term imposition disguised as care? Pale would say that presence is the original violence, that the only ethical position is absence, the gift of not being there to need things from. Emmanuel Levinas says the opposite. He said that ethics begins with the face of the other, with seeing someone and being seen, with the mutual obligation that comes from proximity, the way we're responsible for each other just by virtue of existing in the same world. He called it the face-to-face encounter, the moment when you see another person and realize you're obligated to them whether you chose it or not. Levinas survived the Holocaust, spent 5 years in a Nazi labor camp, watched most of his family die, and he came out of that believing obligation is sacred, that we are bound to each other, that trying to escape that binding is trying to escape being human. Pale would say Levinas was describing the problem, not the solution, would say, yes, we are bound to each other, and that binding is violence. That being responsible for someone else's existence is terror. And being responsible for your own existence in someone else's world is imposition. Christianity had a word for what Pale wanted: kenosis, self-emptying. The idea that God became human by emptying himself of divinity, by giving up power and choosing limitation. The Philippians hymn says Christ emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, made himself nothing so he could be with us. But kenosis is about presence through absence, about becoming less so you can be closer. It's still present, still relationship, still the machinery of obligation running underneath. Pale wanted something cleaner. He wanted absence through absence, to love by not being there to love from. Teresa Grimm says Pale told her once, years before the broadcast, that the problem with philosophy is that philosophers keep existing while they philosophize. They write about ego death, but they still sign their names. They talk about non-attachment, but they still want tenure. They argue for radical positions from comfortable positions. The contradiction undermines the argument. If you really believe what you're saying, Pale told her, you have to live it. You have to become the proof. So he did. He stopped being Vernon Pale, stopped being someone whose presence mattered, stopped participating in the economy of recognition and obligation and debt. And the uncomfortable part of this story, the bit that makes it more of a sad story than anything, is that the people who knew him say they felt relieved. Not immediately, not while they were looking for him, but later, months later, years later, they felt lighter, like a weight they hadn't known they were carrying suddenly lifted. Like Pale's absence was the gift he promised it would be. His students didn't have to worry about disappointing him anymore. His colleagues didn't have to navigate his intensity. His family, if he had any, didn't have to manage the relationship. He just wasn't there, wasn't asking anything, wasn't needing anything, wasn't being someone they had to consider. One of his former students said, "I think about him more now that he's gone than I did when he was here, but it's different. I don't owe the memory anything. The memory doesn't want things from me." Maybe that's what Pale figured out, that the only way to be present without violence is to be present only as memory, as idea, the philosophy that lives in the broadcast but not as the philosopher who made it. Maybe he found the only clean exit from obligation, the only way to give without imposing, to love without weight. Or maybe he just broke. Maybe the philosophy was just elaborate justification for a man who couldn't handle being known, who chose isolation and called it ethics. Either way, he's gone. He's been for 40 years, and we're still talking about him and still carrying him, still obligated to the question he asked by disappearing. What do we owe each other, and what does it cost to find out? 40 years after Vernon Pale walked out of WVTX and off the map, someone buys a box of VHS tapes at a storage unit auction for $35, plays them, finds the broadcast, and uploads 17 seconds of it to Reddit with the caption, "Found this insane philosophy guy from the 80s talking about how Christmas gifts are violence. Anyone know who the fuck this is?" 300 comments in 6 hours, half of them saying it's fake, performance art, someone just doing a bit. The other half saying they remember, they watched it live or heard about it or knew someone who knew Pale. The thread gets cross-posted to philosophy forums, to TikTok where someone sets Pale's monologue about obligation to lo-fi beats and it gets 2 million views. Why now? Why does a censored broadcast from 1983 feel urgent in 2025? Why does Vernon Pale's argument about the violence of gifts land harder now than it did then? Because we are drowning in obligation. We have built a world where debt is the primary mode of relationship. Every interaction is tracked and measured and expected to be reciprocated, and we're all so tired of performing gratitude for things we never asked for. Social media made it explicit, made the ledger visible. You like my post, I like yours. You comment on my grief and I comment on yours. You share my work and I'll share yours. We are all keeping score. All calculating who owes whom and how much and whether we're even. The algorithm tracks it, measures engagement, tells us who's invested in us and who we're failing to invest in enough. Pale would recognize this, would see it as the end game of what he was diagnosing. The violence of gifts scaled up to digital infrastructure. Every notification a small demand, every message a weight, every tag a claim on your attention. We call it connection, we call it community, but it is obligation, it is debt. It is the machinery Pale described running at processor speed, faster than we can keep up with. More debts than we can ever repay, more gifts than we can ever reciprocate, more presents than we can ever match. And we are exhausted, all so exhausted, from being seen, from being expected to see, from the constant low-level hum of everyone needing something from us and us needing something from everyone, and none of it ever being enough. Pale's exit starts to make sense. Not as philosophical extremism, but as the logical conclusion of realizing that presence is weight, and the only way to stop being weight is to stop being present. Here's what Pale missed, what he rejected, what he understood and chose to ignore anyway. Maybe obligation isn't violence. Maybe it's just relationship. Maybe the weight of gifts, the burden of being seen, the debt of love, maybe that's not something to escape. Maybe that's just what it costs to be human. Perhaps the problem isn't that we owe each other. Perhaps the problem is that we've forgotten how to owe each other well, how to give without keeping score, how to receive without calculating payback, how to exist in the economy of care without treating it like an economy at all. There are thinkers who argue this, who say that Pale had it backwards, that we're not individuals who get trapped in obligation. We are obligations that generate individuals. That the self doesn't exist before relationship, it emerges from relationship. You are the sum of everyone who's ever given you something, every gift you've received, every debt you carry, every obligation that shaped you into the person listening to this right now. Lewis Hyde wrote about gift economies, about how gifts are supposed to circulate. Not create linear debt between two people, but move through communities, create webs of interdependence that feel suffocating until they're gone. David Graeber wrote about debt, about how the first debts weren't economic, they were social. They were the obligations that made societies possible, that let strangers trust each other, that built the infrastructure for civilization. And yes, that infrastructure became corrupt, became the thing crushing us. But the solution isn't to abandon it, it's to remember what it was for. To remember that owing someone means you're connected to them, that debt is just another word for relationship, that the violence of gifts is also the grace of gifts, that being obligated to someone means you matter enough to them that they gave you something, that they saw you and that they tried. Maybe presence is violence, but maybe it's also necessary. Maybe we can't love without imposing, can't exist without being weight, can't give without creating debt. And maybe that's okay. That's just what being alive with other people looks like. Pale wanted purity, wanted ethics without compromise, love without the mess of loving. But purity requires removal, requires absence. and no one can't love, no one can't give. There's a rumour, unverified and probably false, but someone claims they saw Vernon Pale in 2004, working at a hardware store in Bend, Oregon, living under a different name. Quiet life, no family, no friends, just work and an apartment and books. When asked if he was happy, he allegedly said, "I don't have to be. I don't have to be." Like happiness is just another obligation he escaped. Contentment just another debt he refused to carry. Like he found freedom in the absence of everything, including the desire for anything. If it was him, if the rumour is true, then Pale managed it. Managed to become no one, to exist without existing. But here is the question, the one the broadcast asks without answering. If you become no one, if you remove yourself completely, if you escape every obligation and every debt and every claim anyone could make on your existence, what's left? What do you win? What's the prize for succeeding at disappearing? An apartment, a job, books, no one to owe, no one who owes you, no gifts given or received, no weight, no presence, no violence, no love, no connection. No moments where someone sees you and you see them and something passes between you that can't be measured or repaid or escaped. No ordinary grace of being known. No terrible, beautiful burden of mattering to someone. Pale treated that as acceptable loss, as necessary sacrifice. But I say he was wrong. I say what we owe each other is the price of not being alone. The tape ends at minute 43, Pale mid-sentence, telling us how to love without violence. The answer cut off, lost to static. But maybe the answer was always incomplete anyway. There's no way to love without violence. Love is violence, the good kind and the bad kind all tangled up. The weight that crushes and the weight that grounds, and the debt that traps and connects. The gift that obligates and the gift that sustains. Vernon Pale disappeared because he couldn't live with that contradiction. Couldn't accept that the thing destroying us is also the thing saving us. That presence is violence and presence is grace, and there's no way to separate them, no clean position or pure ethics, just the mess of being here with each other, owing and being owed, giving and receiving, carrying and being carried. This Christmas, when you give and receive, notice the weight, notice the obligation, notice the subtle violence of generosity, how it feels to be seen, to be known, to be given something you didn't ask for. And notice that you can't stop, that none of us can. We keep giving anyway, keep showing up, keep being present even when it costs, keep loving even when loving means imposing, and keep existing near each other when existence is weight. And that isn't violence. That is the cost of the human condition. The VHS tape sits in a climate-controlled archive now, digitized and preserved, and available to anyone who wants to watch a dead man or a disappeared man or a man who became no one explain why Christmas is a lie we tell ourselves about obligation. 43 minutes of Vernon Pale, then nothing. Here is the problem, the ethical problem. By talking about him, we're making him present. By examining his disappearance, we are refusing his absence. By keeping his ideas alive, we are obligating him, creating the exact debt he spent his last broadcast trying to dissolve. He wanted to become no one. We won't let him. We keep dragging him back, keep making him matter, and keep giving him the one thing he was trying to refuse: recognition. Even in disappearing, he left the tape. Even in seeking absence, he made a broadcast. In trying to become no one, he said something, and saying something is a claim. It is a presence, it is weight. Maybe that's a real lesson, not that gifts are violence and we should stop giving them, or that presence is obligation and we should vanish. But there is no position outside the machinery of relationship, no pure place to stand, no way to exist without existing for someone. Pale tried to find the exit, tried to love without imposing, but he left the tape, and the tape is a gift, the uncomfortable kind, the kind you can't return or refuse or escape. He gave us this theory, this argument, a question about what we owe each other. And now we owe him our attention, our consideration. The debt that he spent his life trying to abolish, he created anyway, one last time in one last broadcast. This Christmas, notice what you give and receive, and notice the weight. Notice the obligation and the expectation, how it feels to be seen and to be known. This is what being human looks like. The weight and the grace all tangled together. No way to separate them, no clean exit, and no pure position. Just us here, owing each other, being owed, giving, receiving, present, obligated, and alive. Merry Christmas to all of you. If this episode hits something in you, if it made you uncomfortable in the right way, if you felt it in your nervous system before you understood it in your head, then good. If you want to keep wandering through this weirdness with me, you can follow the show on all the usual places. We are on TikTok, Instagram, and X with the handle @TheObservingEye. We are on YouTube at youtube.com/@TheObservingEye. And we're on Substack, which is the main home of the podcast, @TheObservingEye.com. Go there if you want your existential crisis delivered ad-free. You know how much I love adverts. If you found something in this episode that stayed with you, then join the discussion. Drop a comment, send me a message, fire me an email, david@theobservingeye.com. And if you want to support the show, make sure you share it with someone who needs their comfortable assumptions challenged. Thank you all for listening. Your time, your presence, and your attention are, as always, greatly appreciated. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.